In a quiet suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, surrounded by snow-covered sidewalks and American flags waving from porches, lived a girl who many never truly saw. Her name was Aisha Suleiman, 14 years old, black, Muslim, American. Her hijab always matched her long skirts. Her Qur'an, wrapped in embroidered cloth, never left her backpack. And her eyes, always calm, always focused, held the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. Because they couldn't place her, couldn't read her, couldn't ignore her either. To the teachers at Rosewood Junior High, she was polite but distant. To the students, the black Muslim girl who never talks. To the masjid community, she was Hafida Aisha, the girl who had memorized nearly the entire Quran by age 12. But to her mother, Khadija, she was simply the child Allah gifted me to remind me of him. From the moment Aisha could read, she preferred verses over cartoons. While her peers played games on their phones, she was reciting Surah Al-Baqarah. Her Arabic teacher once called her the soul of an old scholar trapped in the body of a teenager. At home, she was quiet but thoughtful. She prayed without being reminded. She fasted even when it wasn't Ramadan. She stayed up for tahajjud on school nights. One day, her younger brother asked why she woke up so early. She smiled gently and replied, "Because Allah comes closest in the last part of the night, and I want him to know I'm waiting." But the outside world was not as gentle with her soul. At school, Aisha faced what they called subtle prejudice, though there was nothing subtle about it. A substitute teacher once asked if she was hot under all that cloth. A boy in gym class mimicked her prayer movements, bowing mockingly. One girl asked her if she'd ever been bombed before. When Aisha reported it, the school counselor said, "They probably didn't mean harm. You're strong enough to let it go, right?" So she did. She let it go, again and again, until letting go felt like swallowing fire. She became quieter in class, but her voice grew stronger in her Quran. One Friday evening at the masjid during youth halakha, the group was asked, "What ayah do you want to be remembered by?" While others giggled and whispered, Aisha stood and recited from Surah Al-An'am. "Indeed, my prayer, my rites of sacrifice, my living and my dying are for Allah, Lord of the worlds." Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blink. The room fell silent. Aisha didn't speak often, but when she did, it was like truth wrapped in silk, soft yet impossible to ignore. One night, after praying Isha, Aisha turned to her mother and said, "Mama, if I don't live long, make sure they bury me where the Muslims are. And don't let them remove my hijab, even if they ask." Khadija stared at her daughter in alarm. "Why would you say something like that?" Aisha just smiled, her eyes soft but distant. "Because I feel like I'm not meant to be here long. But I want to leave, right?" Khadija didn't sleep that night, but she brushed the thought off like dust on her prayer rug. Until one morning, a cold, silent morning, Aisha didn't show up for far. And that's when the world, at least for her family and her ummah, shifted. The call to Far echoed through the community. But her room was silent. Her shoes were untouched. And her Quran lay open to a surah about death and resurrection. Something had happened, and it would shake not only her family, but the hearts of strangers around the world. The morning sky over Minneapolis was iron gray, the kind that clings to your bones. Snowflakes drifted slowly to the ground, silent and soft, in stark contrast to the rising panic in Khadija's chest. Aisha never missed far. Never. Not once in 14 years. Khadija had woken before dawn, as always. She'd prepared the prayer mats, warmed the water for wudu, and called out gently to her daughter's room. Silence. She tried again, voice firmer. Still no answer. Her heart knocked louder than her voice. She opened the door. Aisha's bed was made. Her prayer clothes folded neatly at the edge. But she was nowhere in sight. Then Khadija saw it. The Quran on the floor, opened to Surah Al-Qiyamah, the resurrection. A verse circled in pink highlighter. "Does man think that we will not assemble his bones?" Yes. We are able even to proportion his fingertips. Khadija's legs weakened. Her hand went to her chest. She called her husband. She called the neighbors. Then finally, she called 911. The day unraveled like a dream that shifts into nightmare. Aisha had gone for her usual early walk, something she did quietly to reflect, to recite her memorized surahs. But that morning, she never came back. Hours later, they found her, collapsed near the edge of a wooded path, the Qur'an still tucked in her coat, her hijab perfectly pinned, a soft, faint smile frozen on her face. No violence, no struggle, just gone. The medical examiner later said it was a rare, undetected heart condition, a silent time bomb. 1 in a million. Instant. Painless. But Khadija knew better. Her daughter had felt it, had known. If I don't live long, make sure they bury me with the Muslims. At the masjid, news spread quickly. Imam Bilal, an elderly Sudanese scholar who rarely spoke at length, wept openly at the pulpit. We lost a soul whose heart beat for Allah, and perhaps Allah missed her more than we deserved to keep her. Her classmates posted filtered selfies and awkward condolences. Some said things like, "She was weird but peaceful." Others asked if it was suicide, because those types of people are always so quiet. Aisha was reduced to those types even in death. But something strange began to happen. The racism and Islamophobia she endured in life now met a wall of divine irony in death. Because her story wasn't going quietly. That evening, a janitor at Rosewood Junior High, Mr. Reggie, an older black man who always smiled at Aisha, posted a heartfelt tribute on Facebook. She used to pray behind the bleachers during lunch. I'd catch her whispering verses with eyes full of light. Y'all never saw her, but Allah did. And now he's got her. It went viral overnight. As her janazah neared, Muslims and non-Muslims from across the city began to gather. But the city cemetery board refused the burial permit. There's a limit on Muslim plots, they said. And she wasn't on the pre-approved registry. The family would have to fight even in death to give their daughter the resting place she asked for. By mid-morning, the community gathered at Masjid Noor, tucked on a quiet corner between the Somali coffee shop and the boarded-up beauty supply store. Inside, mourners trickled in, older women in black abayas, children clinging to mothers, men with heavy brows and heavier hearts. But there was no body yet, no casket, no green burial cloth. Only a mother, sitting on the prayer mat, silently shaking. Khadija's voice was raw. She clutched her phone, scrolling through emails and calls. They said no again. She whispered to her husband, tears threading her voice. They said the Muslim section is full. Imam Musa tried to remain composed, but the insult cut deeper than grief. They had already buried dozens from their community in that cemetery. Some barely religious. Some buried without proper rites. But now, Aisha, a girl who memorized the Qur'an, who lived with purity and purpose, was denied a resting place? We are not asking for charity, Imam Musa said, standing before the gathering crowd. We are demanding her dignity. The board at Rosewood Municipal Cemetery claimed the denial was a technicality. The Muslim plot was indeed full, and Aisha wasn't on the reservation list. But that list had only ever existed in theory, and white families were routinely given spots on short notice. A local reporter caught wind. Then a civil rights attorney offered pro bono help. Within hours, hashtags were trending. Hashtag let Aisha rest. Hashtag buried with bias. Hashtag our daughters matter. At home, Aisha's body lay in the living room, wrapped in white linen, her favorite lavender perfume lightly misted on the cloth. Her best friend Hafsa sat beside her, whispering ayat of comfort. You said the grave would be either a garden of paradise or a pit of fire, she murmured. Yours will be full of light, inshallah. That night, another letter arrived. This time from the cemetery board's lawyer. Pending formal review, the burial must be postponed. If attempted, legal consequences may follow. It wasn't just bureaucracy anymore. It was a wall. And Aisha's family had a decision to make. But it was Aisha's younger brother, Yusuf, just 9 years old, who said the words that moved them all. If they won't let her in, he said, let's take her to the Prophet's masjid in our hearts. Let's give her the grave that angels will visit. Khadija nodded slowly, holding her son's trembling hand. Then we'll fight. For her. For every girl who wears hijab and is told she doesn't belong. She belongs. The next morning, hundreds showed up outside the city cemetery, Muslims, Christians, even Jews and atheists, all united in silence. One elderly white woman, clutching a cane, stood near the front holding a cardboard sign that read, "Let her rest, or we will not." And inside the funeral van, Aisha's casket waited, ready to cross that final boundary. The wind that morning was unforgiving. It howled through Rosewood Cemetery like a warning, slicing across bundled coats and chilled resolve. The heavy snow had stopped, but a thin crust of ice still clung to the ground. And yet, nearly 300 people stood in silence at the cemetery gate. No chants, no shouting, just presence. Defiant, sacred presence. Khadija stood near the front, wrapped in a long black coat, her hijab tucked tight around her face. She held her son Yusuf's hand, and beside them, Aisha's casket rested on a green velvet bier, covered in the white cloth she loved so much. The city police were already present, not in riot gear, but visibly tense. Officers spoke quietly into radios, watching the swelling crowd. The cemetery gates remained locked. Inside the office, the board members debated. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected civil rights attorneys. They hadn't expected a CNN news truck. And they hadn't expected this many people. Black, white, young, old, Muslim, and not. All demanding the same thing. Why this girl? One board member whispered. Why now? Because Aisha was all of them. She was the quiet girl in AP chemistry who skipped prom. She was the one who stayed behind after class to erase the whiteboard. The one who smiled even after being called towelhead by a classmate and then told the principal, only to hear, maybe he didn't mean it that way. She was every black girl who had to choose between being invisible or being called aggressive. Every Muslim who had to smile through suspicion. She was the uncelebrated, the unheard, until now. Suddenly, the gates creaked open. One officer approached the crowd. A representative from the board followed, clearing his throat awkwardly. After consulting with city officials, we will allow Aisha Muhammad's burial in Section F. Section F wasn't the Muslim section. It was a new section, recently cleared, previously unused. But the moment the gates opened, Imam Musa raised his hands. She doesn't need their approval. She needs her people. Let's go. Cheers didn't erupt. No one clapped. They moved forward in solemn lines. The crowd split like a river around Khadija and the casket. Every step they took, footprints marked defiance in the snow. The burial was simple, pure, powerful. Verses were recited. Dirt was placed gently over the body. And then, as the final prayers were whispered, something extraordinary happened. A white dove landed on the headstone, just for a moment, before soaring into the cold, gray sky. As the mourners departed, Khadija stood alone at the graveside. She pressed her palm to the cold marble. "You didn't die in vain, my daughter," she whispered. "You just taught the world how to live with courage." But that was only the beginning. The emails, the letters, the waves of messages that would pour in from other black Muslim girls across America, saying, "I thought I was alone, until I heard about Aisha." It started with one email. A girl from Chicago named Amina wrote, "I used to hide my hijab under a hoodie on my way to school. After hearing about Aisha, I wore it proudly for the first time. I didn't care who stared. I thought, she did more in her silence than I've done in all my fear." Then another message from a student in Minneapolis. "My teacher said Islam was a foreign religion. I played your daughter's recitation of Surah Rahman for the whole class. They cried." Khadija hadn't planned to read any of them. She barely checked her inbox in those days. But Yusuf was the one who opened the laptop and clicked the folder titled for Aisha. There were already over 200 unread messages. Meanwhile, Imam Musa organized a community reflection night at Masjid Noor. Flyers were posted around town and online, inviting anyone, Muslim or not, to speak about their experiences with racism, faith, and the quiet struggles of identity. That evening, the masjid overflowed. An elderly black man spoke first, a Vietnam veteran. He hadn't stepped into a mosque in 15 years. When I heard how they treated that baby girl, I said, "Not again." They tried to bury her voice, but they just made her story louder. Then came a young Latina hijabi, only 15, who had faced bullying in her public school. "I thought being Muslim meant shrinking," she said, her voice trembling. "But Aisha, she taught me that faith isn't something you hide, it's something you wear with honor." Even the mayor came, awkward in a suit 2 sizes too large, and promised to review the cemetery policies with new equity guidelines. But it was Hafsa, Aisha's best friend, who broke the silence that followed. "We didn't even get to have a graduation together," she whispered. But Aisha already graduated to something better. A video of her words was uploaded online that night. By morning, it had gone viral. #Aisha's Light trended in 6 countries. TikTokers began sharing stories about wearing hijab, confronting racism, or standing up in school assemblies to demand inclusive policies, all in Aisha's name. Back at home, Khadija sat by the window, watching the sunrise. She hadn't spoken to the press yet, though they had called non-stop. Yusuf curled beside her, playing a recording of his sister reciting Qur'an. "Mama," he said, "does this mean Aisha's still talking?" Khadija nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Yes, baby," she whispered, louder than ever. 2 weeks later, the city council proposed renaming a local scholarship program after Aisha Muhammad, a move that sparked backlash from conservative groups. One pundit even said on live radio, "Why honor someone whose only claim to fame was dying Muslim and black?" But what they didn't know was that Aisha's story wasn't done. Not even close. The hate came like a cold wind, sudden, sharp, and bitter. It started on a talk radio show. A local host with a loud voice and a loyal base spent 10 full minutes mocking the city's plan to name a scholarship after Aisha Muhammad. "Let's be honest," he sneered. "This is about checking diversity boxes, not merit." What did this girl do, anyway? That clip circulated fast. Within hours, Khadija's inbox, once filled with love, began receiving dark emails. "Take off your hijab. She's not a hero. She's a martyr for the wrong cause. Go back to where you came from." They weren't just trolls. Some were neighbors, co-workers, even teachers. One local pastor released a statement. "While we mourn any young life lost, we must question if we're glorifying a religion that is incompatible with American values." Khadija clutched her prayer beads tighter each day. Her phone buzzed with interview requests and debate invitations. "Come defend your daughter," they said. "Come explain your faith." But she refused to make Aisha a spectacle. Instead, she spoke once, and only once. At a town hall meeting, packed wall-to-wall, Khadija took the microphone. The room held its breath. "My daughter memorized the Qur'an. She stood up for classmates being bullied. She volunteered at nursing homes. She never raised her voice, not even when they insulted her faith. So no, she didn't die for a cause. She lived for one truth. Compassion. Dignity. If that's not American, maybe the definition needs to change." The room erupted in applause. But the fight was far from over. Protests started at City Hall. "No Sharia in our schools," signs appeared. A local petition called for the cancellation of the scholarship proposal. It gained 3,000 signatures in 2 days. And then, someone vandalized Aisha's grave. Khadija arrived to find the marble cracked and a crude slur scrawled in black spray paint. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just stood in the snow, clutching her son's hand as Yusuf whispered, "Why do they hate us, Mama?" Her lips trembled. "Because they don't understand us," she replied. And people often fear what they don't understand. But that night, the masjid doors opened wide. Hundreds came to help scrub the stone, replace the flowers, and repaint the shattered sign. The next morning, someone left a note on the gate. They can't break what shines from within. 3 days later, a black Muslim high school teacher named Layla Ahmed stood before her school board. She pulled out a photo of Aisha. This girl gave her classmates strength. She reminded our daughters they belong. I'm asking, not as a teacher, but as a mother, that we say her name and honor what she stood for.
Then she paused.
Because if we don't tell our stories, they'll keep writing them for us. The room fell silent. And for the first time, the board listened. The boardroom was full of cameras. News crews had shown up, expecting drama, controversy, maybe even protests. What they got was something quieter, but far more powerful. Ms. Layla Ahmed stood her ground as a black Muslim educator in a predominantly white school district. Her voice did not tremble when she spoke. Aisha Muhammad changed lives without saying a single word to most of you. But somehow, her silence spoke louder than hate ever could. The board members sat stiffly. Most were unfamiliar with the weight of veiled grief, with being a symbol when all you wanted was to be a child. But something had shifted. Aisha's name was no longer a petition, no longer a trending topic. It had become a mirror, and people didn't like what they saw in their reflection. Still, they voted. 4 in favor, 3 against. The Aisha Muhammad Youth Perseverance Scholarship was approved. The news exploded across social media. A TikTok clip of Ms. Ahmed's speech hit 2.3 million views in 24 hours. The clip ended with the words, "Say her name." Not because she died, but because she lived with purpose. Khadija sat in the quiet corner of her living room, watching the video through blurry eyes. She hadn't spoken to the media yet. Not once. But this time, she opened her camera.
She wasn't polished.
No makeup. No rehearsed lines. Just a mother, cloaked in a black abaya, framed by her daughter's Qur'an shelf in the background. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Aisha's mother, and I want to thank every one of you who saw my daughter, who refused to let her be forgotten. Aisha was black. She was Muslim. She was proud. She was kind. She memorized the Qur'an. She was 13. And even though some said she didn't belong, she proved she did. She still does. Within hours, hashtag Justice for Aisha turned into hashtag Live Like Aisha. Her recitations were being added to Islamic study playlists. Schools added lessons about Islamophobia and racial equity, citing her case. Even a group of students in London organized a hijab and hoodie day, a call to solidarity that swept through schools in Toronto, Johannesburg, and parts of France. At her grave, now restored with gold lettering and lined with Quranic verses, flowers never stopped arriving. A sign now read, "Here rests a girl who reminded the world, dignity is a right, not a request." One day, an unexpected envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a white girl named Chloe, the one who once told Aisha her scarf made her look like a terrorist. The letter read, "Dear Aisha's mom, I was cruel to your daughter. I was ignorant. I let others laugh and I laughed too. But since she passed, I've learned more than I ever did in school. I read the Quran. I cried through Surah Maryam. I wore hijab for one day and couldn't handle the stairs. I'm sorry. I know it's late, but I will carry her name with me, always. Chloe." Khadija folded the letter gently. For the first time in months, she smiled. On the night of what would have been Aisha's 14th birthday, the mosque held a vigil. The air was thick with memory, not grief alone, but gratitude. Lanterns lined the courtyard like floating prayers. Children clutched small Qur'ans and pink roses. The imam, with his warm, aged voice, began the recitation of Surah Al-Baqarah, Verse 286, "Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear." Khadija sat quietly in the front row, hands folded tightly in her lap. Yusuf sat beside her, head on her shoulder. The boy who used to wrestle with Aisha in the hallway now barely spoke unless asked. As the prayer ended, a young girl stepped forward. Her name was Amira, age 12. Her voice trembled at first. "I used to be afraid to wear my hijab at school. I thought they'd laugh at me, but then I read about Aisha. I saw the way she didn't hide who she was. And now," she smiled shyly, "I wear it every day, even when it's hard." The crowd clapped. A few elders wiped tears. Later that night, Khadija returned home and walked into Aisha's room, still untouched. The lavender bedsheets, the Quranic calligraphy above the desk, the shelf lined with Islamic books and Marvel comics. On her desk was the last thing Aisha had written in her diary, the one no one had touched. Khadija finally opened it. Just a few scribbled lines. If they knew the peace and prayer, they'd never call us names. If they heard the Quran the way I do, they'd never hate again. I wish I could show them. That night, Khadija dreamed of Aisha. She stood on a mountaintop, radiant, in a flowing white hijab, surrounded by stars. Not like a child, but something higher, stronger. You showed them my love, Khadija whispered. No, Mama, the vision smiled. We did. The next morning, a letter arrived, this one from a congresswoman. She was sponsoring a bill titled the Aisha Muhammad Student Protection Act, legislation requiring anti-Islamophobia training in schools, protection of religious clothing, and consequences for racial bullying. It was the first of its kind. At a national education summit weeks later, Aisha's name was etched into a marble plaque next to Ruby Bridges, Malala Yousafzai, and Anne Frank, a tribute to young girls whose courage changed generations. That night, Khadija stood outside under the stars. Beside her, Yusuf pointed up. Mama, look, he whispered. That one's the brightest. That's Aisha's. Khadija blinked back tears. Yes, she whispered. She's still guiding us. One light against a world that once tried to dim her. And in the distance, a new family moved into the neighborhood. Black, Muslim, hopeful. A little girl in hijab waved at them from the porch. Spring arrived in waves of warmth and wildflowers. But in the school district where Aisha once walked the halls unseen, change was no longer just symbolic, it was policy. Every teacher now received mandatory training on cultural sensitivity, anti-racism, and religious accommodation. Every classroom displayed a poster that read, "Your name, your skin, your faith, nothing about you is a problem." But one teacher still hadn't said anything. Mrs. Delaney, Aisha's former homeroom teacher, the woman who once asked her to remove her hijab during a fire drill for safety, hadn't shown up since the board meeting. Until now. On a rainy Wednesday, she returned, walking into the school like a ghost with a heart cracking open. Her colleagues looked at her differently. She walked into the principal's office and requested a private assembly with the students and parents. Khadija was hesitant when she received the email invite, but something told her to go. In the auditorium, every chair was filled. Parents who once feared the district now came boldly. Muslim families, Black families, immigrants, allies, all gathered with folded arms and open hearts. Mrs. Delaney stepped onto the stage.
She was not who she used to be.
Her voice cracked as she began. I didn't speak when I should have. I let my bias blind me. I failed Aisha Muhammad. A gasp passed through the crowd. She was brilliant. She was kind. And her throat caught. I treated her as if her difference was something to be managed, not celebrated. She turned to face Khadija directly. I am sorry. I will carry that regret the rest of my life. But I hope this community will let me do the work to make sure what happened to Aisha never happens again. Khadija's heart beat painfully in her chest. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she stood up slowly. Aisha taught the world a lesson. Even in death, if you are willing to teach that same lesson with your life, we'll listen. The room erupted in applause. Outside, a rainbow arched over the school. It felt divine. That same evening, Yusuf asked his mom a question. Do you think Aisha forgave her? Khadija thought for a long time. I think Aisha would have said, we forgive to free ourselves, not them. And that's what she did. Weeks later, a book arrived at Khadija's door. It was titled The Quiet Strength, Aisha's Story, written by a journalist who had covered the story from the start. Inside was a dedication page to the girl who never raised her voice, but made the world listen. Beneath it, in beautiful gold ink, were the names of over 10,000 children across America who had joined #LiveLikeAisha youth groups. It was more than a tribute. It was a movement, and it was just beginning. The book went viral. Within a week, The Quiet Strength, Aisha's story became a bestseller. Libraries ordered it in bulk. Teachers requested it as curriculum. And schools across the U.S. began hosting Aisha Days, events centered around empathy, faith, and courage. But in one small Alabama town, something unexpected happened. At Riverstone High School, a Muslim student named Zainab Ali wore her hijab for the first time after reading Aisha's story. Her voice shook during her class presentation as she said, "I wear this today because someone braver wore it yesterday." Her classmates stared, then stood. One by one, students placed notes at her desk. "You're seen. Thank you for your strength." Aisha would be proud. The next day, 5 other girls wore headscarves in solidarity, even though they weren't Muslim. It sparked a trend on TikTok. #headscarves for Aisha began circulating with over 3 million views in 48 hours. Meanwhile, Khadija sat in her living room, stunned, watching clips of young people across the country talking about her daughter. One boy said, "She made faith look like fire wrapped in grace." Another said, "She taught me it's okay to be different, and that truth is more important than comfort." Khadija wept for hours that night, not tears of sorrow, but of awe. She walked to Aisha's room and opened the window. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine. A single bird perched on the sill, chirping a melody that somehow sounded familiar. At the next mosque gathering, the imam made an announcement. "We've partnered with schools to launch the Aisha Muhammad Scholarship Fund, supporting young Black Muslim girls in their pursuit of Quranic memorization, education, and leadership." Aisha didn't just leave a legacy. She created a pathway. Khadija held Yusuf's hand tightly as the congregation rose in thunderous takbir. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That evening, Khadija opened her email to find a letter from Michelle Obama. It read, "Your daughter's light reached me. Her story is proof that dignity in the face of discrimination is the strongest revolution. Thank you for raising a warrior of peace." Attached was a request. Would Khadija consider speaking at a White House panel for inclusive education? She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Her baby girl's voice echoed again. "We don't need to be loud. We just need to be real." The marble columns of the White House shimmered beneath the morning sun as Khadija stepped onto the grounds, clutching her daughter's Qur'an against her chest. She had worn Aisha's favorite emerald green scarf, a soft, cotton fabric that still carried the scent of her room. Inside, she was greeted with respectful nods and a warm embrace from the First Lady's representative. "We're honored you're here," she said gently. "You're not just Aisha's mother. You're a voice for thousands who haven't been heard." The education panel was packed with teachers, policymakers, civil rights leaders, and teens. Black, brown, Muslim, Jewish, LGBTQ+, and more. They had all gathered in Aisha's name. When Khadija took the stage, silence fell like a curtain. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Her heart pounded. But then she remembered the countless nights Aisha recited the Qur'an under a blanket, whispering through the dark, not for show, but for connection. So Khadija spoke, not like an activist, but like a mother. "My daughter didn't die in a war zone. She died in a school, while being mocked, ignored, and misunderstood for what she wore, how she prayed, and who she was. She didn't want fame. She wanted to be left in peace. But when she was denied that, Allah gave her something bigger, impact." As she continued, tears welled in many eyes. Every time a child's name is mispronounced on purpose, every time a Muslim girl is asked to remove her scarf, every time a Black student is punished for speaking up, we fail. Not because the system is broken, but because it was built this way. The crowd remained quiet, then someone stood up. A teacher from Texas, then a student from Ohio, then a senator, and slowly, one by one, they began chanting softly, "Aisha, Aisha, Aisha." Not as a cry of mourning, but of momentum. Afterward, Khadija stood in the rose garden with the First Lady. "You've lit a fire," she said. "The world won't forget." Khadija smiled softly. "It wasn't me. It was a girl who carried the Qur'an in her backpack and peace in her voice." Back in Detroit, Yusuf walked into his sister's room for the first time in months. He stood before her bookshelf, reached for a diary she used to keep, and noticed something. Tucked inside was a sealed letter. It was addressed to him, handwritten on the envelope. "For when I'm gone, but you need to hear me." His hands trembled as he opened it. Yusuf sat cross-legged on the carpet in Aisha's room, the silence thick and sacred. He held the envelope delicately, like a fragile piece of his sister had come back to speak. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, looping, with little hearts on the eyes. He could barely breathe as he unfolded the letter. It began, "Dear Yusuf, if you're reading this, it means Allah has called me home. And if you're crying, stop. I mean it. Stop. Wipe your tears and read carefully. I want you to know that I never felt alone, even on the worst days. You were the best little brother a girl could ask for. I still remember when you tried to fast for Ramadan at age 6 and nearly fainted during math class. You always made me laugh, even when school was hard. Yusuf, the world will try to make you small. It will try to shrink your dreams because of your skin, your name, your faith. But don't you dare let them. Speak boldly, walk proudly, and carry the Qur'an in your heart. You're stronger than you know. And when people try to dim your light, remember this. Allah sees you. Always. Tell Mama I'm okay. Tell her I saw the gardens. Tell her the angels are real. And you, my sweet Yusuf, live in a way that would make Jannah miss you. Love you always, Aisha." The room seemed to hum with warmth. As Yusuf finished reading, a breeze slipped through the window, gently lifting the corner of the prayer rug where she used to sit. He placed the letter back into the diary, his heart cracked open but full of fire. "I'll make you proud," he whispered. "I promise." Weeks later, Yusuf entered a national Quran recitation competition. When he stepped up to the mic, he wore Aisha's favorite green scarf wrapped around his wrist like a band of courage. His voice was steady. His eyes were bright. He began, "Bismillahirrahmanirrahim," and the hall fell into reverent silence. Faith isn't weakness, it's resilience. Aisha's devotion to Islam gave her strength in a world that tried to erase her identity. Discrimination in silence is still violence. Whether through school teasing, systemic barriers, or silent dismissals, oppression often hides in plain sight. Your story can outlive you. Aisha's death was a loss, but her life became a spark, igniting unity, healing, and change. Young voices are powerful. Youth can carry legacy, fight injustice, and redefine the future. Allah never wastes pain. Every hardship Aisha endured became part of a greater purpose. Aisha may be fictional, but her story is real in spirit. Every day, countless Black Muslim girls walk hallways where they feel invisible, mocked, or unsafe. Their faith and identity are not burdens, they are beauty. Let this story be a call
To see.
to protect, to amplify, to love without conditions. You may never know whose life your kindness could save, or whose legacy your voice might carry forward. May we all live so that when we're gone, the world is brighter for having known us. And may we meet, one day, in gardens beyond pain. Ameen.